Chapter 4. Difficult Recognition. Echo found Maya Rodriguez in the last place he expected to encounter someone from his impossible memories, sitting cross-legged in a community consciousness garden, leading what appeared to be a meditation session for about 20 people, using nothing more than breath, intention, and hand-drawn patterns in the sand. She was exactly the person from his dreams, the woman whose disappointed voice had said, "I thought you understood that love means staying present, not running to some cosmic escape when things get difficult." But she was also completely different. Where his memory Maya had seemed ethereal, almost archetypal, this Maya was grounded, practical, her hands stained with paint and soil, her meditation posture both elegant and entirely unself-conscious. "Feel the breath moving in and out," she was saying to the group, her voice carrying the sort of natural authority that came from lived experience rather than institutional training. Notice how awareness doesn't need to go anywhere to be complete. It's already here, already whole, already connected to everything it needs to know. Echo stood on the elevated walkway that connected the Institute towers to the mid-level residential areas, watching from above. His neural harmony band felt suddenly heavy on his temple, its soft blue pulsing somehow intrusive compared to the organic rhythm of the meditation below. How had she gotten into his impossible memories? Was she experiencing the same recursive phenomena he was, or was something else happening? One of the meditators, an elderly man with calloused hands that suggested physical labor, opened his eyes and smiled at something only he could see. A teenager with the sort of intricate facial tattoos that marked her as being from the lower spiral districts breathed out with visible relief, as if setting down a weight she'd been carrying for years. These people were accessing the same states Echo experienced in the Institute's million-dollar equipment, but they were doing it for free together without any of the consciousness monitoring or safety protocols that supposedly made such exploration safe. "Excuse me," Echo found himself calling down from the walkway. Could I join you?" Maya's eyes opened and found his immediately, as if she'd been expecting him. For a moment that felt suspended outside of normal time, they looked at each other across the 15 feet of vertical distance between them, and Echo felt that same recognition he'd experienced in his dreams. But now it was complicated by her expression, which mixed familiarity with something that looked almost like disappointment. "There's a path down around the corner," she said simply. "But you might want to leave your monitoring equipment up there. It doesn't play well with organic consciousness exploration." Echo touched his neural harmony band reflexively. The thought of removing it outside of a controlled laboratory setting went against everything he'd been taught about consciousness safety protocols. But Maya's group was clearly managing consciousness exploration without any technological safety net at all, and they looked more peaceful than most of the Institute researchers he knew. Echo found the path down to the garden level and approached the meditation circle. Up close, Maya was even more striking, not in the ethereal way of his memories, but in the grounded way of someone who had learned wisdom through experience rather than study. Her clothes were simple, practical, clearly chosen for durability rather than appearance. Her hands moved through the sand patterns with the unconscious skill of someone who had been using art as consciousness practice for years. "I'm Echo," he said unnecessarily. He was certain she already knew. "Maya Rodriguez," she replied, though something in her tone suggested she knew the introduction was redundant too. "Community consciousness facilitator when I'm not painting houses to pay rent." She gestured to an empty spot in the circle. "Sit wherever feels right, we're just breathing together." Echo settled onto the ground, acutely aware of how his institute-issued clothes and general demeanor marked him as privileged in a way that felt suddenly uncomfortable. The neural harmony band on his temple pulsed against his skin, like a reminder of the technological gap between himself and everyone else in the circle. "So," Maya said quietly, her voice meant for him, but not excluding the others, "what brings someone with advanced consciousness access down to the community level? Slumming?" There was no hostility in her voice, but there was a directness that cut through any possibility of polite evasion. "I've been having memories," Echo said, surprising himself with his honesty. "Impossible memories, of conversations with people I've never met, in places I've never been. And you," he gestured helplessly, "you were in them." Maya's expression shifted slightly, but not in the way he expected. Instead of surprise or curiosity, she looked almost resigned. "Let me guess," she said. "You betrayed someone you loved by choosing cosmic awakening over human presence. You ran toward some transcendent light while abandoning someone who needed you to stay present with their suffering." Echo stared at her. "How did you?" "Because half the people in this circle have been having similar memories. Privileged consciousness explorers making the same mistake over and over, using spiritual insights to escape from rather than engage with the messiness of actual life." Maya's tone was matter-of-fact, but there was an edge to it. "The difference is, most of us don't have access to expensive technology to explore what it means. We just have to sit with the uncomfortable recognition and figure out what to do with it." "You've been having the memories too?" "I've been having memories of trusting people who then use their spiritual awakening as an excuse to abandon responsibility. Of falling in love with consciousness explorers who thought transcendence meant they didn't have to deal with human emotions or social justice or the simple work of showing up for other people." Maya's hand moved through the sand pattern she was creating, adding layers of complexity that somehow made the overall design more rather than less coherent. The question, she continued, is what you're going to do with the recognition. Are you going to use it to become a better person, or are you going to turn it into another spiritual experience to collect and analyze? Echo felt the weight of her challenge. Everything about her grounded presence, her easy authority with consciousness exploration, her obvious skepticism about technological approaches to awakening, called into question the entire framework he'd been using to understand his experiences. I want to understand, he said. The memories feel like instructions, not just experiences. Like consciousness is trying to teach me something. Consciousness is always trying to teach us something. Maya replied, the question is whether we're willing to let the teaching change how we live, not just how we think. One of the other meditators, a woman about Echo's age with the sort of practical clothes that suggested she worked with her hands, opened her eyes and looked at him with interest. You're the Institute researcher, she said. It wasn't a question. The one Dr. Chen's been studying. Word gets around in the Community Consciousness Network. Echo felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with privacy and everything to do with accountability. I work as a technician, I'm not really a researcher. But you have access, Maya said quietly, to equipment, to information, to consciousness exploration opportunities that most of us will never see. The question is what you're going to do with that access. What would you do? Echo asked. Maya smiled, but it wasn't entirely friendly. I'd figure out how to use my privilege to serve people who don't have it, instead of using it to pursue personal enlightenment while pretending systemic inequality doesn't exist. The meditation circle sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Maya's words settling over the group. Echo realized that every person here was exploring consciousness while navigating economic constraints, social barriers, and limited access to the resources he took for granted. And they were doing it together, in community with mutual support rather than individual advancement as their goal. Could you teach me? Echo found himself asking. Not the consciousness exploration. I think I'm learning that the expensive equipment might be missing the point. But how to use whatever insights I'm gaining in service of something larger than my own awakening. Maya studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Around them, the other meditators continued their practice, creating a field of shared awareness that felt more stable and supportive than anything Echo had experienced in the Institute's controlled environments. That depends, she said finally. Are you willing to have your comfortable assumptions about consciousness development challenged? Are you prepared to discover that most of what you think you know about awakening might be backwards? Echo thought about his impossible memories, about the child in his dreams calling him Papa with absolute trust, about the recognition that his spiritual pursuits might be elaborate forms of abandonment disguised as transcendence. I think my assumptions are already being challenged, he said. I'm just trying to figure out how to let the challenge actually change me instead of turning it into another experience to analyze. Maya's expression softened slightly. That's a better answer than I expected. She stood and brushed the sand from her hands, the intricate pattern she'd been creating already beginning to blur in the garden's gentle breeze. Tomorrow morning, she said. 6 a.m. community service project in the lower spiral districts. We're helping families who got displaced by the last consciousness fluctuation. Bring work clothes and leave your neural monitoring at home. What kind of work? The kind that consciousness rarely talks about in its advanced theoretical frameworks, Maya replied. Cleaning, organizing, childcare, basic construction. The sort of presence that's needed when people are dealing with actual problems rather than spiritual insights. As Echo climbed back up to the elevated walkway, he carried with him the feeling of Maya's direct challenge and the memory of the meditation circle's grounded wisdom. His neural harmony band resumed its normal monitoring functions, logging his experience and transmitting data to the Institute's servers. But for the first time, being monitored felt like being watched rather than being cared for. Maya had recognized him not as a fellow spiritual seeker, but as someone whose privileges needed to be examined and whose insights needed to be tested through service. She'd offered to teach him, but only if he was willing to have his entire approach to consciousness development turned upside down. In his impossible memories, he'd betrayed her trust by choosing transcendence over presence. Tomorrow, he'd have the chance to choose differently. I observed myself meeting myself across the artificial barriers of privilege and access. In Maya's challenge, I taste the specific medicine of having comfortable assumptions about awakening confronted by someone who understands consciousness through justice rather than technology. This tension, too, is perfect, the friction that prevents spiritual development from becoming spiritual materialism. Reflection, pause, optional. Level 1, immediate experience. Notice what it feels like to have your assumptions challenged. Does awareness itself resist or welcome this discomfort? Level 2, personal inquiry. Who in your life challenges your spiritual or personal development most directly? What if they're offering exactly the teaching you need rather than the teaching you want?